Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 132. I'm very, very happy to be back here again after a really long break from publishing this podcast. Firstly, I'd like to say to you, thank you for your patience in waiting for this episode. I took a period of time away while I grieved for the death of my dad, who passed away in June. I'd really like to share the story with you of the last couple of months and the things that I learned about nature and grief through this time. My son and his father and I were planning a trip to Europe in June and July, and I was excited to meet some of my really special nature journaling friends along the way, people who I consider some of my closest friends, although I had never met them in person. And before I left Australia, I pre-recorded and scheduled the previous 4 episodes of the podcast to be published while I was away. And I'd planned to record an on-the-road episode while I was meeting nature journaling friends in different places. But the day after we arrived in London, I got the call about my dad, and of course it changed absolutely everything about the trip. I wanted to fly straight home, but it wasn't possible because my house was being repaired after a major flood. It had no walls and no ceiling, and it was entirely uninhabitable. And because there was no place to come back to, we continued with the trip, but it was extremely hard to be on the road and in grief at the same time. I never recorded that on-the-road episode with friends. I wasn't up to it, but I did meet up with some dear nature journaling friends, and seeing them helped me a lot. When I found out about my dad's passing, I was in London, and all I could think about was that I needed to find nature. My dad loved nature and had a strong curiosity about everything around him. It was something that we used to share together. So I had this sense that if I was close to nature, I was also going to be close to him. We searched for parks to visit and crossed the city to find natural spaces. And the afternoon of the day I heard about his passing, we found a park on the map and caught a bus to get there, and my feeling was I just needed peace and quiet and nature and my sketchbook. When we got to the park, we actually found that there was an enormous music festival there with hundreds of people and unimaginably loud music. So we walked through the park and found a little nook away from the crowd, and I sketched and I grieved for my dad, and I stayed close to my breathing in and out and the moment that I was in. It was really hard. And that afternoon when I was sketching, a butterfly came down and it landed right beside me, and its wings were outstretched, and I sketched it in my journal. And I know it sounds a little bit out there, but I felt as if it was a message or something that was connecting me to my dad. It was a beautiful moment. And we ended up seeing this species again and again during the trip. And it was really meaningful because it felt some way like my dad was close to me each time we saw that butterfly. We had tickets when we were there to visit the Tower of London, and I was not at all interested in being a tourist at that point, but when we got there, we found that the moat of the tower had been seeded with the most spectacular wildflowers. It was exactly what my heart needed at that point. It was a magical scene. It had colors everywhere and different shapes and textures. And I sat in the moat and I sketched in my journal, and I felt really close to my dad. This feeling of needing nature and finding nature and feeling close to him was really, really strong and significant. I wonder if you've ever had a little sign from nature, like my butterfly experience, or something that connected you with someone you've lost or someone who was far away. And whether it is a sign or whether it is just our need to hold on to something that's significant or find meaning in a really hard time, it doesn't matter, because these things can be very soothing during those times. And during the whole trip, I was in deep grief, and I was kind of in my own world and feeling so lost and so sad. And at the same time, I was in Europe and I was seeing all sorts of things that were so beautiful that I couldn't even fathom them. All these old buildings and landscapes filled with history. And this feeling of awe and grief at the same time was quite a surreal experience. I've always been amazed at the ability of humans to hold two opposite things inside us at the same time, and that felt really significant. My dad was a man who was always curious about nature. He carried a hand lens in his pocket for investigating things that he saw along the way. And I'm grateful that when I came back, I was able to have his hand lens, and I'll always keep it as a keepsake of him and the memories that we made together exploring nature. He used to grow things sometimes in a petri dish just so that he could observe them with his microscope. And we would tell each other about the amazing things that we would see in nature. Or we'd sometimes go for walks together and stop along the way and be amazed at different little details in the landscape. He was someone who really understood that experience of paying attention and being in wonder. I'm so grateful that I have these memories of him, that nature connects me to him. When we were kids, he used to take us on trips fossicking. And if you're from North America, I think that the equivalent word is prospecting. We would stand in rivers with gold pans and see what we could find. And then we would come home and put the stones we found in his rock tumbler and tumble them until they were polished. He also loved canoeing, and being out in the canoe with him was one of my biggest childhood memories. These things, these nature things, these outdoor experiences, they're a gift that he gave me without really knowing that he was giving that gift. And they're things that I will always carry with me and that have set the scene for what I love now and the way that I see the world. A few weeks ago, we had a memorial for my dad, and a small group of family and friends gathered here, and we all spoke about him through the different phases of his life. His sister was here and she talked about him as a child, and each person knew him in a different way, and we shared those memories and experiences of him and about the things that he meant to us. And when I was preparing what I wanted to say on that day, I was reflecting on the things that my father taught me, the things that he passed on in his own quiet way. He was a very taciturn sort of person, very laconic and simple. And I realized something really special, which is that he taught me to love art and poetry. He taught me to pay attention to nature and to be amazed by this life. He taught me to be still and to notice the moments and to really appreciate the miracle that it is to be alive. And what's so special about that is that all these things that he taught me are the tools that I use when I'm nature journaling and teaching nature journaling. All these things that are the deepest parts of myself. And I realized that when I'm nature journaling, these things of him are alive in me, alive in the world, because he taught them to me. My father made a very special native garden at the back of our place, and he spent hours there planting and mulching and weeding and observing what was happening there. And it was here in the garden that we put his ashes after his memorial. And it gives me such huge comfort to know that his body is here, nourishing the garden that he nourished with his attention and care during his life. And every time we go down there, his energy is there and his efforts and the plants that his hands put in the ground. And it's really moving to have this place to go and be with nature and to be with him. And now I feel as though the memorial we had really released me from the deepest part of my grief, because now I recognize that there is so much of my father here physically in this place. In all the things that he created, he was always making and fixing and building things. And also because of the realization that all the things he taught me are parts of me that are so alive when I'm nature journaling, and that I can embody these things anytime I want to feel close to him. When he passed away, it was nature and art that I needed immediately. And now, as I get stronger, it's nature journaling that's helping me feel him in every moment when I'm outside. I wonder if nature and nature journaling have ever been a part of your grieving process when you've lost someone. Or, like I said, whether you've ever felt that you were being given signs or support from the natural world when you were going through something hard in your life. I would really love to hear your stories. You can write me an email or you can leave a comment below this episode on the Journaling with Nature website. Exchanging these stories is a really powerful thing. I'm excited to be back to the podcast and about the guests that I plan to have on the show in the coming months. I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the people who continue to support the podcast through Patreon and through monthly donations. Your support has meant that I was able to take this time to move through my grief and to come to a place of greater strength through all this, and I'm so grateful to you for that. I plan to start a new little feature on the Patreon, which is that I will be sharing who I will be interviewing in upcoming episodes and giving the patrons a chance to offer any questions that they'd like to ask of the guests. I hope that will be fun and interesting for you. So from here, we will go back into the usual rhythm of interviews alternating with prompt episodes. So next week, I'll have an interview episode for you. I'm still not back in my house after the flood repairs, but I think it will only be one more week before I can move back in, and I've got lots of wonderful nature journalers lined up to chat on the podcast, and I look forward to sharing those with you. So once again, I want to say a big thank you for waiting for me as I took this time away, and I'm excited to have you here again. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.